First of all, it's a real honour and a real pleasure to be here and to join for this meeting. CLGF has been very engaged with the work of the SDGs generally in terms of supporting our members around localising the SDGs. And I think that this initiative is really starting to take that to the next level and to really start to unpack what that means in terms of municipalities and local governments of all kinds and of all sizes around the world. And one of the sort of words for this meeting this week is very much innovation. And I think we hear a lot that local governments are in a good place to innovate, in that they maybe are less constrained than central government, that they maybe have a bit more flexibility, a bit more opportunity to innovate. And we have a fantastic panel here today to really look at the tricky question of how. How does that happen? How do we make that happen? What levers do we have as local governments and local communities to make that happen effectively? And how do we make that work in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals and making sure that we leave no one behind? So we're going to start, I guess, with the really tricky question, which is going to guide the rest of the discussions over the next couple of days. So as Diana said, we have three fantastic speakers in this session. I'm going to introduce them all because we're going to run through in one go. We have Rogelio Biazzi Solomonov, who is the Chief of Staff of the Municipality of Rosario in Argentina. And then we have Matthew Quatinetz, who is the director of something called the New York University Urban Lab, based in the USA. And then our third speaker is Ferran Martos, who is the planning and evaluation expert from Sant Boi de Llobregat municipality in Spain. So already a big difference in terms of geography, in terms of perspectives, in terms of context, but I'm sure it's going to be a really exciting session. And each of our speakers has a short presentation which they're going to share with us on this issue of how. Really, how do we make innovation work in public policy at the local level? What are the lessons that we can draw from projects and initiatives that they have had the benefit of being able to deliver? And how can we use that question to really guide a bit our discussions over the course of the next 2 days? So you haven't come to listen to me, you've definitely come to listen to them. So I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, who's Rogelio Biazzi Solomonov from the municipality of Rosario. So over to you, Rogelio.
Hi. Sí. Good morning. So sorry for the little delay. I get lost into this awesome school.
Me too.
So thank you so much for inviting me to this meeting and to allow me to share my experiences. Bueno,
My name is Rogelio Biazzi. I come from Rosario. Rosario has...
First slide. Okay.
Rosario is a city of 1.5 million inhabitants, approximately. It is a city of 178 square kilometers surface area, with 179 inhabitants per square kilometer. Our city budget expenditure is $395 million approximately, and the expenditure per capita is about $365 per person. We have a social expenditure within the total public expenditure of $230 approximately per person, per capita. In all societies, there are debates that we believe we've had. Debates, well, we think we've already solved the important issues, we've had the important conversation, but then things happen and we realize all the important debates are not so well finalized. So these places where we can hold debates and share experiences on important topics are like an oasis of knowledge in a desert of uncertainty. This is why I would like to again thank, now in Spanish, the Development Program of the United Nations and the Barcelona Provincial Council for this very nice invitation to Rosario and to myself to share these experiences. First of all, I wanted to talk about the emergency. I wanted to talk about the emergency of tackling these debates. When we talk about the future, when we talk about the present and the future, in my case, from the place where I come from as deputy mayor of the city of Rosario, I think of the city we inhabit, but mainly I think of the city we will be, the city we would want ourselves to inhabit in the future and our children to inhabit in the future. And for that, the first thing I would like to say is that this type of debate means taking a leap forward into the future, and human beings are cognitively unprepared to think of the future because of the uncertainty. We are change averse, and we are reluctant always, and it is difficult for us to think of incorporating deep change and innovating in the way we live. So the first thing would be knowing that we are facing challenges of the future in a changing world and in the midst of uncertainty. So the first reflection I would like to pose is precisely based on change in the world and the speed of change, the rate of change. The world is changing at a staggering speed, and I think mainly driven by three unstoppable forces. The first one is globalization. The world today is absolutely interconnected. Whatever happens in one corner of the planet has a direct impact on what happens elsewhere. Suffice to say, what happened during the pandemic, the Wuhan closed on one day, and 3 weeks later the whole world was on lockdown. So we are in a globally interconnected world. Whatever happens in one corner of the world happens almost immediately in the other end. The good and the bad, bad such as wars, pandemics, and the good such as scientific progress, technology, innovation. About climate change and the powerful force, the first challenge we have, any inhabitant of this planet, but especially those of us who are in charge of governance in cities, in no more than 25 years, will hold more than 75% of the world's population. We are an urban world, and measures, initiatives related to tackling the challenge of climate change have to stem from the cities. Suffice to see what happened in Spain in the past few days, in the past week. I'm half Spanish. I lived for 16 years. I lived in this country. My children are Spanish. They were raised here. So I felt the pain, and I express my solidarity with those who suffer from the storms in Valencia especially. And the third driving force of the world is technological disruption, unstoppable force. When we talk about technological disruption, we can see the speed, the staggering speed of change in the world. We are talking about looking at things not in linear terms as we used to do, but looking at things in exponential terms. And these changes in the world, promoted by these great driving forces, impose an individual need to adapt to what's new, to what's coming, to what's profound, but especially as human beings, but as civil servants, as members of the government, we are under the obligation of understanding these processes, how the world is changing, and we must think and align public policies to these changes, and therefore incorporate all innovations that are necessary. And when we talk about change and innovation in the public sector, I believe it is always more difficult. Public sector is always lagging behind the private sector. In my case, I can talk about my city for two main reasons: budget restrictions, and also because of the rigidity of public administration, the famous red tape, and the slowness of the state as an administration to face changes. So I'm going to go from general to specific, giving you about 5 levers of innovation in the local government based on the experience of Rosario. The first lever is something more general, and innovating, at least in our experience, the greatest innovation we've had in local public management is tackling first the purpose of what we do. People and the organizations that innovate and lead start by communicating their purpose, their vision, their why. In this manner, we are more successful when inspiring and making clear what we want to do. True leaders know why they do what they do, and this is a source of inspiration for the entire organization. There is a model to follow. It's the golden circle, inspired in the golden proportion, this mathematical relationship that is related to order in nature. So the first thing is the why. Understanding why we do what we do improves leadership and the culture of the organization, and this is a basic innovation in public management. Generally speaking, we all start by what we do, what we want to do, and then we get to the how, and we rarely think of the ultimate purpose, what pushes us, what drives us, but the leaders start with the why, and they create this motivating belief and lead to the innovations necessary. We'll give an example. Apple, for example, did this.
Most companies inform or tell us what they develop and ask us to buy from them. Apple didn't say, listen, we develop computers, they are amazing, buy from us. They said, we want to challenge the status quo with everything we do. We believe in thinking differently. We are at the front of innovation. Our approach is developing devices which are user-friendly. We develop amazing computers. If you also think differently and challenge the status quo, buy an Apple. So this message, I believe we need to adapt it to our organizations. I am not here to say, I am the mayor, I am a civil servant, I am doing more public works. No, we need to share our leadership approach. For example, we can say, I dream about a safe and clean city, a beautiful city where to live. I'm going to put more public lighting. I'm going to restore the streets so that public transport can be improved. Join me and let's make our dream come true. Martin Luther King, in his famous speech, didn't say, I will be approving a bill to balance human rights. He didn't even say, I have a plan. He said, I have a dream. I have the dream that my 4 young children one day will live in a world where they will not be judged by the color of their skin. And this is how change happened, right? This is how change was possible. The second lever I would like to refer to, and I'm going to dig in a little bit, the way we work. When we arrived to the municipality, we adapted our working methodologies. In the past, the methodology was a traditional one. It was based in the traditional approach. And, you know, public administrations have been operating similarly for a long time, split in silos. And now we need to adopt a methodology based on projects with multidisciplinary teams according to the needs of each project. In the context of Agile methodology, one speaks about a Scrum, where we all have leaders who are responsible of implementing solutions. These working teams are not permanent, and each project has to come with KPIs and metrics to measure the fulfillment of the objectives. The third lever is looking for a technological managed team that allows us to work efficiently, quickly. We need to develop technological tools to manage our common goods. We need to develop also a Kanban-related or a Post-it-related methodology where we organize in columns our actions, and all this in a holistic and integral platform. A platform that at the same time is a management tool and a tab, a control tab. Now, we need to adapt our working methodologies to develop holistic tools to prioritize projects and split business as usual from more strategic projects. This would be my third lever, the technological tools at our disposal. The 4 innovation lever we've implemented, and I'm going to focus more into specific things, has to do with the intensive use of data in decision-making processes, what we call data-driven governance. This is our main strategic line in Rosario. We are part of many international programs, some of them promoted by Lumber Philanthropists, which is basically an alliance of cities, of data-driven cities. This is a public approach management technique that focuses on data to take informed decisions, to enhance transparency, increase resources, and enhance and boost the efficiency of public policies. When developing or using advanced technologies, governments can anticipate needs, assess the impact of our actions, and quickly adapt to change, thus ensuring a service which is more citizens-oriented and that responds better to the needs of citizens. We need to focus on citizens. We need to put citizens at the center of all public policies. Now, the fifth experience or lever I would like to share with you has to do with innovation. We are now in the process of implementing it in Rosario, and it has to do with our engagement with citizens, the citizens channel. Let me give you a few figures from Argentina, which I am sure apply also to the majority of your places of origin. 94% of the population has access to internet, 89% of the population over 6 years old use smartphones, and 97% of users use WhatsApp. So it was easy to take a decision. We developed a chatbot, a WhatsApp number where citizens interact directly with the municipality, with the city council, to do whatever they need through this platform. Today in Rosario, we have a quite interesting experience in, we call it Monibot. It's a citizens chatbot that, again, is focused on claims resolution, information gathering, and everything is available online. And this, of course, has a clear aim. We want to be a 24/7 channel. In the past, we had a traditional approach. In the past, we had been attending our citizens by phone. 95% of our interactions happened by phone, and now we've moved radically to an online platform. 59% of our interactions are now online digital channels. Our aim is to go to the minimum 10% maximum of phone engagement or interaction, and the rest has to be online. At the end of the day, we need to unbuild the system to enhance the interaction between the municipality and the city council. We hope we can move forward. One last example of a specific application. We have a network of CCTV cameras, more than 1,000, and thanks to that, in Rosario, we are improving a major citizens' problem. There is quite a lot of crime, narco crime. So we have installed a network, a robust network of CCTV cameras, all of them equipped with AI on the edge. So on the same device, we're using algorithms in our CCTVs to spot what is interesting at any given time. And we are also developing new innovation lines, but I don't want to take too much time on that. Let me answer to your questions, if there are any. And this is what I wanted to share. The theater is not what is going to happen, but rather what we are doing today. Those who have government responsibilities, municipal government responsibilities, need to adapt to change, because citizens live in cities, and we have the moral duty of defending the city as a natural habitat of individuals. Thank you.
Rogelia, thank you so much for kicking us off so positively and with some really thought-provoking comments. I really liked your oasis of knowledge and an oasis of uncertainty. I think, you know, and I think that probably sums up for many of us in the room how we feel about some of these existential challenges that we're all facing, but really helping us in the room, and also let's remember we have other colleagues who are joining us online as well to really start to dig into some of these issues around innovation, some of the ways in which you've changed things, but also some of the challenges that you still face. I am going to open up questions to the floor in a second. I want you to kind of think a little bit about your questions and who you want to share those with. But first, I just want to ask our other two panelists just to reflect a little bit and whether they have any questions. So, Matthew, I'm going to come first to you, whether you have any questions on this, and then Ferran, I'm going to come to you as well.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent and inspiring presentation. I really appreciate the reference to SINEC and the why. You talked a bit about cities being the natural habitat of the citizens at the end, and I guess I wanted to push it back to you and ask what is the most important technological innovation that you're finding to measure how much social spend you should have versus your per capita. On your very first slide, you showed your per capita income and then how much you were spending on social services. Do you feel like you're able to measure whether you're above or below, or how you think about that?
Bueno, excelente, gracias.
Thank you very much for the question. We have actually measured our per capita social investment, and all this has to do with all the initiatives that we develop in social areas, such as health and social development. Thank you for this excellent question, in the sense that, well, of course, one can use technology, because, well, of course, I had to rush through my presentation, but before, I wanted to say also that we're working very intensely in using data to develop public policies, and for that we'll need meta-based, AI-powered systems that allow us to measure. So basically we have two very important registers. We have a massive data lake in Rosario municipality. I am sure you also have data lakes, and basically there are two domains. When it comes to your question, we have 52 health centers, primary health centers, distributed all around the city, and in these health centers we have a register of clinical histories, and even we have a register about the pets of these families that also bring information about their mental health, physical health. And if we combine this with data lake on social services and the inclusion in the schooling systems, which is a massive universe of data. So if you combine all these registers, you come up with a social and health register, which allows us to geolocate families, individuals by age. Also, there's the register for the sports department, which is also part of social development of human beings, right? And there we register more than 80,000 boys and girls who play sports in the context of a program called CREAR, which is a high-level sports center in the city. So again, we register absolutely everything. What is your name again? Sorry? Matthew, sorry. So Matthew, thank you very much for the question. It's very interesting because we're using this massive data lake to develop control tabs based on metadata and combining it with artificial intelligence. And this is essential for a better understanding of what policies need to be implemented in each neighborhood, street, and in which families, right?
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful answer.
Thank you. Ferran, over to you. I think you might have a question too.
Sí. Buenos días. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Rogelio, while listening to you, I kind of felt I was listening to myself. I only met you this morning. I hope I'm not going to replicate your presentation. So thank you very much for the question to our colleagues' question. So you have a universe of data combined with artificial intelligence. All this data, all this information, of course, then have to be transformed into knowledge. You also raise the question of assessment, evaluation. How do you assess? How do you evaluate? Because a lot has been said about how, to what extent sometimes data are an extra burden if they are not well managed. So how are you learning about this process of how to curate data? Thank you very much. I'm sure you're not going to replicate my presentation. It's just that oftentimes those in similar positions think similarly. So thank you for your question. I am the Chief of Staff in Rosario Municipality. So in my area, I have an agency, and within the agency, there is a data lab. And the data lab, of course, is engaged in developing the control mechanisms, and we also have control groups and analysis groups for each data package or data area. What we think is that data, of course, can be overwhelming. The amount of information produced is massive, never-ending, so in order to use it in an efficient way, everything has to be curated and well assessed. So there is a specific unit within the data lab that focuses on data assessment, and in each project, as I said at the beginning, quite quickly, in all our projects, as I said before, this control tab includes a folder for each project we are implementing, not on a bow approach. With metrics, with targets, and we're using the data we gather in this data lab, and then the relevant information is sent to the project manager so that they can come up with a more tailor-made assessment and thus fit the journey for each project.
Thanks very much, and I think really demonstrating the commonality of some of the challenges that we're facing and the approaches that we're using. I'm going to come next to Matthew, and I think he's going to sort of develop this a little bit further and build on some of the points that you've been making in terms of some practical examples from New York that he's been working on. So Matthew, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. I'm Matthew Quatinetz. It's truly a pleasure to be here. Thank you for your words, Rogelio. I also want to thank Diana and UNDP, as well as the Barcelona Provincial Council, for having me. I know that we're going to talk throughout the day about innovation in terms of workforce, in terms of cities and finance and procurement. I'm going to give 4 to 5 examples from US local government, and those examples will range in different localities that I worked for, ranging from a small rural community of just 200 people, not 200,000, 200 people, through a southern community in Augusta, Georgia, that's 200,000 people, to a small city or medium-sized city, which is Austin, Texas, about 1 million people, and then New York City, 8 million people. And I have to say, after listening to your presentation, Rogelio, I changed my presentation right now just a little bit to start with why. So why am I talking about these things? I can guarantee I will not be replicating the other 2 panelists' presentation. So I want to step back and say, we live in a world where we're trying to implement these SDGs and make true change in terms of impact. And actually, when we look back at history, we're in a very strange time historically. These last 50 to 75, maybe even 100 years have been very different for global capitalism than they have ever been before. Previous to that time period, there was a general recognition, even in very strong capitalist economies, that social value was an essential part of anyone's actions, including for-profit corporations, that changed a lot in the 1970s with practices in economics that have since been proven false, but are still being expounded as if they are the way to run our societies. And so for myself, as a young person coming up first as an artist, and then an activist, and then an entrepreneur, and then a public servant, and now an academic, I think a lot about the rising power of global capital that is happening at the same time as we really are reducing. Yeah. At the same time as we are actually reducing the amount of dollars inside the polis, inside the social sector. So today I'm going to talk about 3 different examples, 3 innovations of how we can harness some of the rising power of global capital in double bottom line strategies using land. This creates unlimited funding without raising any taxes, because we are in this very difficult situation of trying to fund an increased amount of social good while trying not to drive away our citizens. So this is a form of circular economy, similar to what we talk about with regenerative economies, and we generally call it value capture. I've given a little example on the right of how you can break down land value, which is far on the left, the large blue column. And this is representative of a project I'll show in a moment, the Made in New York campus in New York City, where we took that land value and instead of just selling the land, traded it for very specific social actions to be delivered by the private sector outside of the normal annual procurement and budgeting process. So that was very successful. I've shown a couple of different roles that I've had throughout, so I'm speaking from a place of practice. I know I'm an academic, but I became an academic from having all of these roles and creating training programs in some of these places, eventually coming to NYU to share that knowledge and indeed train folks such as the Mayor's Institute in the United States, as well as for-profit actors, government actors, and business actors. So the 3 innovations that I actually will share are public developers, number 1, P5s, land as a capital resource, and at-risk operating agreements. Those last 2 are really one version of the same thing. So in this first one, I'm just sharing a little research that we've done recently about the creation of public developers, which are slightly different than public authorities or community development corporations and land trusts. These are all impact-based developers that use land to create social value or combat gentrification, but they share powers with government. They're often quasi-publics, and almost always they are a separate entity from the rest of the government, have their own board that's a mix of public and private actors, and then they sometimes have contracts as well as partial taxing power and the ability to transact in the marketplace with private developers. So they move at the speed of a private developer, but have social value as their ultimate profit goal. Instead of profit, they're trying to increase social value to the citizens. We wrote a paper on this recently about land trusts, local government corporations, and authorities. I show that on the right. But this innovation has been very successful. I worked for the New York City Economic Development Corporation, shown on the left, and then for the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation under a contract with the Obama administration and the US Department of Energy, promoting sustainability in buildings. And then I actually was fortunate to start 2 more of these, one in Austin, Texas, starting their public developer entity, and the other in Augusta, Georgia. Here in Augusta, Georgia, we used this public developer to advance projects that had been stagnant for 30 years because of lack of funding, and we brought together educational institutions, the US Armed Forces, private developers, the local government, and the state government to create about 10 projects across 4 corners of the city in a time period that was, had been unheard of prior. So it was very successful for us. That continues to this day and turned around that community. In the second example, this P5s with nonprofit anchors, P5s generally adding not-for-profits. I chose to emphasize the Ps. In this area, I worked with the this community of 224 people that is closest to where the Burning Man event happens. The Burning Man event by Burning Man is called Black Rock City, shown on the right there in the middle of federal land. It's important to recognize the context. If you see on the left, Reno is the closest town to Gerlach and Black Rock City. It's about 107 miles away through tribal lands, Native American lands. And that is the closest grocery store to the community of Gerlach. So driving about an hour and a half. It's a true food desert. It's actually in a desert. It's also an energy desert. There's a power grid that goes out there, no medical services, no real services at all, and it's an unincorporated town. So the local government is that town of Reno, 107 miles away. So they really didn't have, they had a lot of money, but no ability to implement solutions on the ground. So we created a partnership with a new public developer funded by the Burning Man organization to create a workforce development center, solar power in the area, and also fire and rescue, emergency services, all done through a public nonprofit partnership. That was done in a way that none individually could actually afford it, but together they were able to create shared governance to deliver those services. Second to last example here is using land as a capital resource. This is the one that pairs with that early chart that I showed. Up on the right there, you see the old industrial piers of New York City. Shown to the left in the light blue is all the ownership with the public development entity, the New York City Economic Development Corporation. What we wound up doing then is not procuring outside developers to develop these things, but actually creating strategies around workforce, daycare, training, transportation, and actual real estate travel strategies that we ran ourselves. There were not other developers involved with most of it, but we were able to combat some of the effects of globalization and technological innovations that had affected this area of the economy and create new jobs and new management. When we were managing toward social, we were able to create competitive industries in things like film and the producing of chips and video production, things that you wouldn't think New York City and Brooklyn could be competitive globally in. We were actually able to pay living wage salaries, provide daycare for workers, and competing electronic products all at the same time to build that industry. Here shown is a campus that was built. The city, we invested about 127 million and then invested ourselves and managed part of the northern part of the campus. This southern piece of the campus, we then leveraged a private partner who invested $900 million into this campus, including in the creation of workforce development programs, building of industry, and creating schooling in the local area. All money that was outside of our tax rolls that was gained by, instead of selling the property, turning it into one of these value capture leases. And then my final example will be on the creation and delivery of the New York City ferry service. This was originally created to address one of the problems that we have in the overall basket of goods when we think about affordability of a location. We were just talking about this earlier. It's not just about affordability of housing, but also about transportation, also about daycare. And so under the de Blasio administration, we determined that we could make housing much more affordable if we just improved transit. And that would allow us to go back to our roots as a city and create waterborne transit. New York City used to have 800 operating ferry systems, and at the time that we started, it had just one that had been built by the Bloomberg administration to service the proposed Olympics. Another story for another time, but another innovation in how they did that. But in 2015, we announced this ferry system, and by 2017, it was operating. That's not an error. We did all of the approvals, all of the building, the construction of the vessels, the construction of the landings, the building of the ticketing systems, the hiring of the staff, all in 2 years. The way we did that was by using this public development entity that was able to leverage the speed of the market inside the public sector on the one hand, and on the other hand, we used at-risk delivery of contracts. It wasn't quite delivery turnkey, but it had components of that as well as components of lease and operations. So we had very specific at-risk components of this contract that had our contracting partner building boats before they won the contract so that they wouldn't pay the penalties once they won the contract of being able to deliver them. So in the news, they announced in 2015 that it was pure folly that anyone could ever deliver something in this speed, and in a very, very rare case of the press conceding to government, they retracted the statement in 2017 and said they were shocked to see that it was actually possible, and then they attacked us every other way they could. But interestingly enough, they attacked on the subsidy, and at the time we had given the private sector partner some benefits starting at 5 million ridership. That again was said to be absurd, that it would never happen. We predicted it would happen within 7 years. Today, it's at 7 million. So it has exceeded every single metric, which does not stop the press from saying, you know, it's a terrible boondoggle. But in actuality, the great stories that we talk about, and I'll end with this, is we think about a single parent family that lives up in the Bronx, and previous to this was spending an hour and a half each way commuting to their job. So losing 3 hours a day, either with their family or with a job. We transformed their commute to 20 minutes outdoors. So that gave them back literally 2.5 hours, either with their kids or in earning power. And that made their life, you know, infinitely more acceptable. So when we turn back to issues of measurement, it's a little bit unclear how we measure that benefit. We could talk about recovery ratios of transit systems, or we can talk about flourishing time with family, or we can talk about GDP, but we don't quite have the way to talk about how we measure that. That was part of the genesis of my question for you. But I think increasingly we should and we will.
Thanks very much for that, Matthew. And I'm sort of going to do the same thing again. I'm going to come to you first, Rogelio. Maybe if you have any kind of reflection on some of the points that Matthew's raised. I think it links very nicely with the comments and the presentation that you gave us first thing.
Sí, gracias.
Yes, thank you, Lucy. Excellent presentation, Matthew. Thank you so much for sharing these experiences. And it is nice because they are very different, small, isolated municipalities, but then places like Brooklyn, New York. And there's something that caught my interest. Something you said about Brooklyn, because in Rosario we're going through a similar process of using public land as a financial resource, but also as urbanization of areas that have been taken away or that have informal settlements. So municipalities, at least in Argentina, have a form of financing. We have very small financing. 50–60% we depend on the national and provincial level, and our own resources in the municipality are scarce, not amounting even to 50%. So local competencies are mainly or partly related to urban planning, town planning, what can be built, how each plot of land can be developed, public or private in the city. In this case, for example, we're going through a process where there's a very relevant area in the center of town, prime land with public land of the nation that is going to be put up for auction for private developers. And we as a municipality have a tool to say how that land is coded, what can be built in that land, and this gives value to the land. But there's been a debate among citizens saying that, or the debate between the use of land for private purposes, or should the land be used to build public parks or common goods, common areas. For us, of course, the goal is to improve well-being of our citizens, either directly through a park or indirectly through facilities that will serve social purposes. So what do you think about this trade-off between In this debate on how to manage and how we find public-private associations and how citizens see public resources, in this case public land, used to give to private owners to develop their own projects?
This is a very great question, and one that all local governments, I think, face. I will say the informal settlement question is also a very interesting one, as we try to measure well-being in informal communities that have a different basket of goods and how they're doing. This is actually how I am here today. I'm doing a study of that in Nairobi and met Diana through that. But turning to your comments, I will just make a side note and say that even New York City only has, I think, about 35 to 40% of the budget is federal and state transfers. So it's only about 60% of earned income, of which under 10% of that is from real estate activities. That said, a lot of it is hidden because of this public developer thing that I mentioned. That ferry system cost $670 million. Of that, the amount that came from taxes is zero. It was completely generated from real estate income from the public developer as that $660 million, and then the private partner was put on the hook for another $300–400 million. So it was almost $1 billion project that cost $0 from the public. The reason that works is in this government turning from being an administrator or regulator or planner into an actor inside the marketplace. And so for your center of town prime land, what I would say, knowing almost nothing about it, so forgive me, is that generally speaking, I strongly advise local governments to never sell their land, period. Giving land out in long-term leases means that over time, as you increase the value of your city and the land around it, you have an annuity, something that is a return on your investment over the long term, because the ground lease payments are normally related to the value of the land. So in New York City, for example, when we built the 42nd Street project, the land in total was worth less than $50 million. Today, it generates over $75 million a year in income for the city of New York, free and clear into forever. This kind of tactic versus to change the subject and the question from should we do a park or should we do something that maximizes value, I would change that question to why shouldn't we, the local government, control that land forever? And in that, we could distinguish between certain pieces of it being park or certain pieces of it being grocery store or housing. This kind of activity generally is rewarded, and it returns higher value, both in terms of the double bottom line, both social value and economic value, and leaves you in control of the area that you live in. So thank you for that question. That was a very good one.
Thanks very much, Matthew. I'm going to come to Ferran if you have a question for Matthew, and then if you can be thinking, because I can see that there's lots of people itching to come in, I'm going to then open it to the floor. So Ferran, over to you.
Sí, muy breve, no.
Yes, very briefly, I loved your approach, your perspective, increasing social value. Difficult to delimit that when society is very liquid and very diverse. Not everyone, we cannot make everyone happy. But I'm taking home the final part of your presentation in terms of how we measure. Going back to the question I asked before, what lessons learned and what elements for improvement, besides what you already said, what do you think of for the future? What's your homework, self-imposed homework, as areas of improvement to be able to make better measurements, better approaches, and to complete all of the puzzle, this social value, this social, more liquid aspect? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Also a very good question. I think the self-imposed homework I referred to just briefly earlier, so I appreciate the chance to expand upon it. I see in all the different local governments I've worked in, a fragmentation of the measurement of success. And that's why I really appreciate the approach that we saw earlier in Rosario of measuring it overall. But from my perspective, one place where we really fail in the US is by measuring affordability of housing different than affordability of education or transportation. And actually what the SDGs do, and what I think we need to do as self-imposed homework, is to look at the entire basket of goods, social goods and necessities for a given family and try to understand the balance between them. Because in some locations, like I showed, we could create more affordability of housing, not by building more affordable housing, but by building transportation. Or in the case of New York City, we did something similar by addressing daycare costs. So at the time that I started working for the de Blasio administration in New York City, if you had affordable housing, you were paying 30% of your income on housing. But if you had kids, you were paying 40% of your income on daycare. So 70% of your income before food, transportation, education, taxes, clothing. That was why every single person who had a family was leaving New York City below a certain income. You could build affordable housing all day long and never address that problem. And so zooming out and thinking more holistically is always my homework. We're trying to develop an index now at the Urban Lab to look at particular cities and the cost of each of the goods to try to understand if there might be simpler interventions that could address livability for citizens as we're in historically high gentrification outcomes.
Thanks very much, Matthew. I'm going to open it up now to the floor. I think I can see anyone wanting to come in? Diana? And then a colleague here. Maybe Diana first.
Yes, hello. Hello, thank you very much for bringing the expenditure per capita. We have asked all our presenters to give us how much money are they spending per person per year. At the UN, we are doing a work on the Financing for Development Conference. It's going to happen in Spain next year, and every 10 years the UN thinks about how are we going to fund the things that we need for sustainable development, and we are trying to bring the question of local government finance, which no central government wants to talk about unless with other countries, but we are doing our best, and one of the things we're trying is to give us the money that you have per person, and it's very difficult because, of course, many cities consider assets debts in the budget, and that's not really budget, so it has been quite complicated. But thank you for the figure of Rosario. I think New York has like $10,000 per capita per person. My colleagues didn't allow me to bring New York into the table because it was too far. We found some Chinese cities which are around 3,000, Canadian cities are around 3,000 per person, and that gives you some idea about really what the municipality is. Freetown has $2 per person per year. So when we talk about development, we're also talking about this. But my question, sorry, this is to explain a bit about the per capita. So if any of you have some data, please share with us, because we are trying to do some graphics to bring attention on this issue. My question for both Rogelio, maybe Samboy as well, because Samboy has 80,000 per population. New York, America, cities are big. Developers, private developers, land, you brought the issue of land. Do you think that for private developers, the sustainability agenda makes any sense, these SDGs, this global agenda, or is something that there is no way that they get involved? Because I have friends who are architects, and they always tell me, but you know, we architects, we're also human beings. We want public spaces. We want to think about health, transportation. We don't want to sell square meters of buildings and then get people stuck because we live there as well. We are citizens. But do you think this makes any sense to them, to the private sector? You know, like the developers, the big money, etc. Is it someone that we can bring on board for this, or it's you think like, no, they're not going to go for it? So.
Thanks, Diana. Let me bring in this one, and then we'll do two questions together. Please go ahead.
Question is to you. You told about the CCTV camera in your city, and you told that it's going to predict the social behavior of the people. Can you tell me how it's happening, what type of social behavior you're monitoring and predicting?
Bueno, sobre la pregunta de Diana.
Well, on Diana's question, thank you. It was very clear to us that we had to submit this information. This is why we showed it. We have your organization was very good. You stressed that point. And I don't know. I don't think it's wishful thinking, but I think private developers, the private sector, are taking into account SDGs, specifically the ones related to the environment, I believe, because of a matter of marketing, commercial strategy. These goals belong to the citizens, to the people, and people are not paying attention to the literal text of the goals for the planet to be more sustainable, but they are paying attention to their daily life, their quality of life in their daily lives. They walk around their cities, they enjoy public space, they enjoy green spaces, air quality is better in the cities, and this then has an impact on a better health status, better mental health status. So I cannot say for sure, but I think private developers do bear this in mind and are willing to invest, or they know that part of their return on investment is going to come from this commercial strategy. And as to your question, where are you from, sorry?
Conducta social.
You talked about monitoring social behavior that I mentioned at some point in my presentation. I don't know if I understood correctly, if you were referring to when we use cameras, for example, with algorithms. And well, there are two things here. First, we've had an issue of coexistence in the city, of cohabitation. We have dictated a code of cohabitation or coexistence with a regulation that is related to punishing misbehavior amongst neighbors. So one of the social conducts that we monitor through our surveillance is simply how people behave, how people treat public facilities, for example, public equipment, whether they break public facilities, public installations. We have sensors. We're working on IoT as well, the Internet of Things. We have sensors, for example, in containers to detect whether people are sorting their waste or not, and at what time they bring their waste out. Or more difficult things in Rosario, for example, we've gone through a period of lack of security, horrendous crimes in the city linked to drugs, increasing murder rates in the city to very high levels. So citizen safety, policing is not our competency. It is a national competency, but we're also working on what we can do with the eyes we have in the city, this network of cameras, how we can use AI algorithms to detect situations that are related to maybe not prevention, but shedding some light on crimes. For example, if we are looking for a motorcycle with an individual dressed in a certain manner, we can use an algorithm detecting not only the license plate of the vehicle, but also the person of the vehicle. Maybe they are wearing a red cap, for example, and we use AI to detect that specific case, to then send it to the prosecutors and the police. And this is what I can answer.
Thanks very much. I don't know, Matthew, did you want to come in on Diana's point around the per capita, and then I'm going to come to Ferran.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I wanted to come to Diana's specific question about whether sustainability agenda makes sense for private developers. We actually did a study of this last year, trying to look at when private developers would engage both with the SDGs and or the ESG framework in general. And the issue really very much depends on their ownership. For a lot of them, if they do that, it makes them non-competitive unless there's regulatory requirement. And so many of them, they literally are prohibited from doing that unless, as was mentioned earlier, there's some demand condition, like people will pay more for a more sustainable home. But some of the SDGs don't result in an increased demand condition. They are market failures. So we have to create some regulation around it. There's one other issue, which is we did a study of all the different frameworks we could find to try to be able to get a direct comparison, because demand won't work if consumers or investors can't tell the difference between whether or not someone's greenwashing or it is real. And so we looked at real estate developers and compared their report out on the SDGs and found that multiple real estate developers could quote the same SDG and do completely different things of very different scales, like spend $1 million versus spend like $20, versus do the thing they're doing and just say it is accomplishing the SDGs. So really creating more specific metrics, specifically around the real estate component, I think is necessary, even for good actors to get rewarded for doing that, which it's challenging for that to be enough, but even that is necessary.
Yeah, please.
Estoy muy de acuerdo con...
I very much agree. Matthew very well completed the answer, rounded up the answer. It is related to regulating with clear incentives for the development, for private developers with clear incentives. In the end, greenwashing comes with investment in something sustainable. So whenever this investment is made with, as Matthew said, regulations, of course, that sets specific requirements for developments. So we need the stick and the carrot as well, so that these developments, sustainable developments, can have a return in financial terms, but also in social terms.
Okay, just quickly, and then I want to come to Ferran, and then because I think there may be some questions for him too. So please go ahead.
Thank you. And I'm Melissa, I'm from UNDP and coordinating the Zoom, so there are some questions from the public, but I can ask when you open the discussions for all of them.
Yeah, maybe if you can do that.
Okay.
Let me bring Ferran in first, and then we'll come to those questions, and then further questions and comments and sharing from the room as well. Ferran, please.
Sí, gracias.
Yes, thank you. Very briefly, so that we can give an opportunity to the online questions as well. If you'll allow me to open up the scope, private sector, focusing in San Boy, I will open another area, which is the automotive sector. The question was on whether the private sector, whether there's interest in the private sector on the topic at hand here today. I think Samboy has 80–90% of car dealers, and it was known as the motor city, the engine city, even top vehicles. But there's been some sort of a reconversion. What I mean to say is when there's a niche of opportunity, when there's a share gain, when a sector has to reinvent itself, be a chameleon and adapt for a win-win, for a shared win, I think this is an area where they can do something. All of the process of the pandemic, and now we've seen actions that have been hybrid together with the private sector, specifically with the automotive sector in our case. We cannot generalize, but I think when there's a win, when there's interest, when there's a need to adapt to new times, people sit at the table, get talking, and find solutions that are closer to the 2030 agenda. Thank you.
Sí. Hacemos la presentación antes de las preguntas.
So first the presentation and then the questions. Okay. Well, Rogelio already said it. Well, I apologize, but it's normal for us to think in the same terms. I was invited to talk about a specific experience, and it is innovating in local public policies. How do we really do it? It is, in our case, we have a political organization and a municipal technical organization based on goals and purposes. This is the experience that I will share with all of you. And as Diana said, what we were encouraged to talk about, well, Samboy is a city or a municipality, depending on how we approach it. We have a bit over 84,000 inhabitants, according to the census on January 1st, 2024. It is placed in a strategic location close to Barcelona, close to the airport, the port. The municipality budget, stricto sensu, well, Samboy keeps or does the preservation of 60% of its territory in terms of forest, river. This is a key characteristic in our municipality. The municipality budget is approximately 127 million consolidated budget, leading to an expenditure per capita of 1,507. We, as many others, are suffering from very strong aging, and it is a topic that will need to be tackled in a different forum. Our starting point, or the reason why I will present this case, as many municipalities and cities, we come from strategic thinking. Historically, we had our triple gaze in the 2030 agenda. Then in 2022, we approved the city strategy. Our city strategy is the circle you see on the left. We wanted to make Samboy a benchmark as a healthy city, creating opportunities for future generations. And this city strategy is accompanied, or was accompanied back in the day, and guides us with 10 missions: sustainability, healthy city, work, all of these collective construction, generating synergies, the transformation of the administration, the transformation of the city, and the identity of the city. And then we started working on the 2019-2023 plan, and when we were about to approve it and take it to the town council session, COVID started, and this made us rethink our strategies and adapt them to the context of COVID. And another strategic element is the city pact, the city agreement, with the idea of a new social and economic promotion in collaboration with the social and economic stakeholders of the city. It's not on the slide, but we had the opportunity to prepare an integrated sustainable development strategy that also led us to carrying out this strategic reflection process. The Urban Agenda Action Plan approved in 2022, a pilot test on the Ministry of the Urban Agenda. We believe that this is the gate, the vehicle that helps us land, that sheds light. And the last tool is the 2023-2027 mandate, which is one more step in that conception of the urban agenda. We already talked about this during the session today, strategic planning. The new term, in a way, allowed us to implement changes. We were aware of the fact that we could not continue with business as usual. We had to do things differently. We had to think, rethink, innovate, change. A specific department was created for urban agenda and strategic projects, very much related and aligned and close to the town council. And an org chart based on competencies was approved with the dimensions of the urban agenda by area and by responsibilities, by programmatic responsibilities. And we think the big change was to align the different strategic actions of the urban agenda with the different areas of coordination and the different information committees. And here we start talking about how we did it and why, with the idea of meeting the 41 actions that we had approved in our urban agenda. And here there was the first change with the first term. We broke away with the plan approved in the urban agenda, and this led to a new area. We have territory, city model, and prosperity, sustainable, healthy, resilient, and safe city, cohesive and transformative city, and digitalization and governance. How did we break away with the urban agenda? We left the social aspect in the social aspect and the economic aspect. We set them aside. We differentiated them because they were big enough. And here we can see the 41 strategic actions of our action plan of the urban agenda that were approved back in the day. And the second aspect that I wanted to stress after having said all of this is that these 41 strategic actions in the first term were turned into 45 lines of action, and out of those 45, about 30 were strategic lines of action, and 15, in a way, were deemed, considered, studied according to specific characteristics, and they were considered to be transformative projects.
And these axes respond, this respond to the 4 axes: care for the elderly, children, culture, sports, education. Now, if we look at it from a digitization perspective, public innovation, the necessary change in the public administration, adaptation, and as our colleague from Rosario was mentioning, communication. A clear communication is very important. If we look at things from sustainability and security, another important transformation process is what we call the renaturalized city, circularity, energy. And in the last times, we've been developing the 15 minutes city approach. Proximity, the Z district, which is a new district we are developing, and with a clear focus on the Z generation, a new idea of municipal facilities that wants to be replicated throughout the city, transformative city, sports city. Another important element is that these transformative projects bring light into the table and allow us to rethink the projects from the past. We are capable now, thanks to these new innovative projects, to reorganize our governance schemes and to reshape our leaderships. Liquidity helps somehow break down the organigram and make things much more horizontal, and to allow transformative projects and innovative lines to be implemented in a more smart approach. And authority is redistributed in this context. We bring autonomy to the colleagues who compose the different teams, working groups. We offer them flexibility. This contributes to empowering them. I believe it is excellent to promote ownership and co-responsibility. Of course, there's a political leadership behind. There's a coordination of the steering committee. In the past, we had a very top-down approach, and today we have a much more horizontal approach, grounded on a committee. There is a coordinating entity. Each team is coordinated by an appointed coordinator who appoints the different members of the team who work together in implementing these transformative projects and the strategic lines. Secondly, we also acquired a follow-up tool, a strategic, which allows us, and this is not in the presentation, so all this has been grounded in a specific actions, in a specific lines of action, and by the end of this year, I hope we'll have first diagnosis with information that can be used to improve projects, to enhance them, to revigorate them. And we aim also at so we want to assess the assessment plan in order to make sure that all the components are sound, if the diagnosis is well designed, well prepared, well grounded. We want to better understand if the design of the action plan is aligned with the previous diagnosis. We want to make sure that we understand the basic problems and we need to understand if the KPIs are robust in order to ensure that the governance is robust enough and well-resourced. We wanted to also understand if the orientation well, May 2025, we will arrive to the mid-term of our mandate, and there we'll do an update of our mandate or term objectives. All this will allow us to improve in awareness raising, in accountability. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ferran. Unfortunately, I haven't done my job terribly well in that I'm running us quite close to the tea break. But I do want to take a couple of the additional questions that have come in online. And if anyone else in the room has a question, I think we can take 3. So maybe if we start with the ones that are online, and then Sarah, I'll come to you. Because I think, you know, these speakers have really raised some incredibly kind of thorny and challenging issues, and I'm sure other colleagues want to come in on some of these issues. So Melissa, maybe a couple of the questions to the speakers.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you, the panelists. So I have one question from Pedro Moraes from Cabo Verde, and he asked, or he introduced his question as saying that the public-private partnerships is a way for local governments to get around the employment situation. So the question is, does the government, the different governments that were presented today, or do these governments have legal tax incentive for private companies that make this agreement and boost employment?
Sorry, maybe Ferran, if you want to come in first on that, and then we'll come to Rosario and to Matthew.
Bueno, gracias, Pedro.
Thank you very much, Pedro, from Cabo Verde, for the question. The answer would be yes, of course. These PPPs are components which, as we said before, aim at aligning public value with private stakes so that we can combine values. PPPs also include third sector universities, such as universities and NGOs. And of course, depending on the project, we include tax incentives. In the case of the public, or rather the private sector, we reduce perhaps local taxes in order to somehow bring on board public partners. Private sector partners, sorry. I understand. Yeah, of course. I am not 100% sure about the case in our municipality, but I'm going to give you the example of the automotive sector or the health sector, because these are the main areas in my municipality. We work in developing synergies between public entities, private entities, and third sector organizations. Of course, there are there's a meeting point between these three sectors.
Response to that as well, which is public-private partnerships are a tool. They can be used well, they can be used poorly. One of the great things about them is, in the examples that I was showing, oftentimes more was extracted from the private sector in terms of employment outcomes without any tax incentives or even any tax at all being used. But the private sector were taxpayers. So it had what we call a net fiscal benefit. And I would say there are legitimate concerns of people around public-private partnerships. As a citizen of your municipality, you should make sure that both fiscal and economic impact studies are done, both separately, measuring different things, to make sure that you're not robbing fiscal costs for a lack of benefit. But there also sometimes is investment that needs to be made, just like when you build a building or create a new business. Day one, you don't make money, you have to invest to make that. So the measurement should be across multiple periods, not just in the first month.
Great, thank you, colleagues, for that. And I've been allowed to take all three of the questions on this side of the room. So I'm going to start with you, and then there were a couple of other questions. We'll take them all together, and maybe you could just remember to say who you are before you give your question.
Perfect, thank you. No, in Spanish. Mi nombre es...
I'm going to be speaking in Spanish. My name is Arnau Gutiérrez, and I am a lecturer at Carlos III University in Madrid. I've found the three presentations most interesting and very well-grounded. Nonetheless, I still have questions. Let me throw you a general question, a broad question. I believe we are attempting to reach different targets, and some of them are perhaps incompatible. It is difficult to speak about the I have a dream and the importance of leadership, and at the same time speaking about data-driven leadership. I believe there's a certain incompatibility, or at least they're not always compatible, both approaches. And there, I believe that it is very interesting, the possibility of developing a specific metrics, as Matthew mentioned, to measure wealth generation or the time invested in this area or that other area. Because if us, as citizens or as municipal leaders, we do not focus only, we do not only think about money when we take decisions. Why should institutions focus only on how much this costs? in order to decide on whether to go ahead or not. The systemic challenge that new technologies pose is that everything can be measured, and the solutions technologies will put forward will be very possibilistic, limited to economic decisions. And who is controlling this? Huawei, Elon Musk, who is controlling these measurements, these online measurements? There are biases. I am not sure these new technologies are the solution or the only solution to local innovation.
I'm from the League of Cities of the Philippines. I'm the executive director. So just listening to the presentations of Rogelio, Ferran, and Matthew, I kind of think of the importance of a non-profit interest group driving our solutions, our innovative policies. For instance, in the case of Matthew, he talks about public developers. And then in the case of Rogelio, he mentioned about the nonprofit actors, and Ferran mentioned about a separate department managing the SDGs. Are we to conclude now? I'm asking if this is a dangerous assumption or dangerous conclusion on the important roles of these invisible hands driving SDG solutions at the local level, where most of us are in fact focused on decision makers or public or private institutions, but those people working at the background, making our lives easier at the local level. Thank you.
Thank you. Anthony Gonani from Malawi, Deputy Mayor of the city of Zomba. I like all the presentation. I think what has been presented. I wish I could have many questions. In terms of urban planning, I think PPE, and also the SDGs as a whole. I think as Malawi, as a country, I think we are failing all of them. And I should sadly say here that 2030 agenda, I think we won't make it, any of them. But that's another subject for discussion. But then I'll go to the question of land as a capital, as the presentation you're saying. Using land as capital resource. I think my question is mostly, I think, in our structure of ownership of land. I think I would like an elaboration more on how maybe from here, Spain, Barcelona, land is controlled and owned, and then from your example, how land is owned, I think, from US. Because in our scenario, like in Malawi, I think land has multiple landlords. And from our city, mostly, we fail at some times to control land because of setup of chiefs. We have city mayors, and then we have chiefs in the cities. Those chiefs have also powers. And then you make resolutions, bylaws, but then at a certain setup, chiefs have also powers on their own. And in the government setup, we also have the Chiefs Act, so that recognizing them, even in the constitution of the law of the land. So there are conflict in terms of those laws. I just wanted to learn more how we can enhance the central government operating through the chiefs, and then the local government operating through the municipals. And then I can learn more from there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to go to our panelists one by one and just ask them to pick the elements of the questions that they want to respond on. They're three very diverse questions. So I'm going to start with you, Rogelio.
Yes, thank you very much. No problem. I can go first. Arnau, thank you very much for your question. In the past, I was a colleague of yours because I was an associate lecturer in the Carlos III. Of course, as far as I understood, your question was about leadership, humanistic leadership, and data-driven approaches. Well, there's a back and forth. This preconceived perspective of those who hold government responsibilities at a given time can be enriched and reshaped thanks to data. Before we spoke about the golden circle, and we spoke about 3 dimensions. So one thing is the why, the purpose, and then we have the how. How do we get to the why? And data are an important lever that can feed processes and speed up our pathway towards the why. Anthony from Malawi, thank you very much for your remarks. You spoke about the contradiction between different legal frameworks. Of course. Bylaws, laws, regulations. Well, at the end of the day, a law is a tool to impose a certain behavior, right? To somehow reshape the cost-benefit analysis we all perform. If we do not enforce the legal framework, it's not even worth adopting it, right? And the problem in Malawi and in my city and in many parts of the world has to do with the clear lack of enforcement mechanism and control and assessment mechanisms so that we ensure the enforcement of bills, of laws, so that we all take into account the cost-benefit impact of not complying with the legal framework. Ferran. So what our colleague from the Philippines raised, and also our colleague from Malawi, is very interesting, because our colleague from the Philippines spoke about something which is, of course, risky. It provokes uncertainty, and we don't really know how to tackle it. But if we adopt protocols, or if we're more rigorous, perhaps we can frame things. And as our colleague said before, our colleague from Malawi, of course we need to be open-minded. We need to have a clear protocol. And these values somehow need to be built progressively, and we need to improve step by step. We'll not come up with a solution from one day to the next. There's no black and white.
Un poco de confianza y un poco de seriedad. Gracias.
And Matthew, maybe just to round out the responses to these questions.
Yes, thank you. I think that our colleague from the Philippines, I didn't catch your name, I'm sorry. But the question you asked, I also will pair with Deputy Mayor Gonani's question about who actually is controlling these entities and how the structure of government and civil society allows that to happen. I want to be really clear that from my perspective, the public developers I showed all are quasi-governmental. In no case were they a standalone nonprofit. I put nonprofits, with all due respect, into the private sector. I think that they have their own challenges and goals, but that the regulation of the failures of the market has to be done by the public sector. That's our purpose, and I think we have different agendas there. So I would contrast the invisible hand solutions with what Hirschman called the hiding hand solutions. The solutions that mean that we have to imagine a future in which, as Arnaud brought up, we can measure something other than just economics or just the tools at hand. And in fact, to imagine that future, all we need to do is reimagine or remember our past. Because for most of society's history, we did measure both of those things and put a limit on how much profit was considered acceptable. For most of human history, lending money was even prohibited. I'm not saying we should go back to that, but maybe there's some balance between where we are today, where companies celebrate getting the maximum amount of profit possible, to a world in which, as government, we can regulate both economic, which we are doing, I think, rather well because we have something to measure and talk about, but also we need to now measure the social. And I think in that, just not to leave your question unanswered, Deputy Mayor Gonani, the form follows function. There are lots of different reasons and ways that we can manage these things under different forms of land ownership. And in fact, the very structure of these public developers was created because in the US, governments were prohibited from participating in some of these economic transactions with land because they had loaned a lot of money during the last period like this, which was the robber baron era for us in the United States, and they had bankrupted many of the local governments. So they made prohibitions against that, and then this creation of public developers came specifically to empower elected officials over administrators. The big administrator of note then was Robert Moses in New York and spread throughout. So there are definitely ways to structure these things, but I would just reinforce that the public sector has to be a part of them in order to enforce the public good, and that we need to measure the right things so that we get the outcomes that we want.
Thanks very much, Matthew. And maybe if I can just say a couple of things just to round out the session. Firstly, a huge thank you to our three presenters, because I think what they've really done is set us off on a very, very good start for the discussions today and tomorrow. So a big round of applause, and please thank you very much to our presenters. I'd just like to kind of make a couple of comments, and then I'm going to hand back to Diana. Particularly from my perspective, I think it's been very interesting to kind of like come in from a very big picture perspective to think about some of those principles which we all know and feel very comfortable when we talk about local government in terms of leadership, in terms of communication, in terms of public consultation, engagement, co-creation with our local communities, and the things that we hold very dear as a sector and as local government, but also to think about some of the ways in which we're needing to use new tools and new approaches in terms of being able to really grapple with the SDGs and how we actually deliver effectively at the local level. And I put in that basket definitely some of the discussions that we just had around data particularly, and how we actually evaluate and monitor what the data is actually telling us, and therefore how we can improve the way in which we deliver services to our local communities. And then I think for us as a community, as a local government community, we can never be too far from the issue of finance and financing development. We've heard from Diana some of the challenges that many cities around the world face in terms of access to resources, but also the scale of the challenge that cities are facing in terms of meeting some of these targets and delivering the SDGs effectively at the local level. So I think starting to unpack different ways of how we put a value on things, but also different ways in which we can use some of the assets that local government has at its disposal. And land was one that we've talked about in this session. I'm sure we'll talk about other kinds of partnerships going forward. I think has really opened up our thinking, I think, as a group. I hope it's really inspired everybody to really think about this thorny question of innovation and how we actually do it. Because I think, you know, we all come, we can bring projects, we can talk about things that we've done, but actually analysing into how and what is the thing that's transferable that we collectively as a group can go away with. I think that's really the nub of this session, and I hope a golden thread which is going to follow us through the rest of the discussions today. So thank you, and thanks again to our wonderful speakers. Thank you. Diana.
Thank you, Lucy, for the wonderful job you always do as a moderator. It's like a certified value to have you in the panel. I'm going to give the floor to my colleague, Catherine Adodoadji. So we have a rapporteur today, so we have asked her to look from the outside perspective, because when you are moderating, you are also like within the debate. So from her perspective, to give us some of the biggest ideas that we discussed today. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Diana. So I'll quickly go through some key points from the discussion. One of the things we mentioned in the discussion was the need to acknowledge uncertainty and challenges in our world today. We also drew on the golden circle, discussing the importance of communicating and explaining why we do what we want to do to the citizens. We also looked at the importance of strategic planning, which was highlighted as allowing us to think, rethink, innovate, and bring about useful changes to our cities. We also spoke about the importance of the role of data helping us to develop citizen-oriented solutions and evidence-based solutions. We also looked at the importance of considering social value as an essential part of any action that we take. And we spoke about the need to leverage private partnerships in delivering services. And finally, we also looked at how we can reconsider ways of measuring success, taking into account the social impacts of the services that we deliver. Thank you.